Welcome to the Learning Cosmos podcast. I'm your host, André Hedlund, educational psychologist, author, geek, and nerd. This show brings you science and learning through conversations with stellar people from different fields. Put on your spacesuits and hold tight. Our voyage into the learner's universe begins now. Welcome to another episode of the Learning Cosmos podcast. And I'm very honored to have this amazing guest here today, Professor Henry Roediger III. That's a very cool name, by the way. Dynasty, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for accepting my invitation. Roddy, right? I can call you Roddy.
Yes.
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 So, Professor, I was wondering, why is science important? I like to ask this question first because I think, especially nowadays, a lot of people are against science or they are denying certain things, fact checking, and there are a lot of fake news, especially about learning. So why is science important? Why does science matter? Please tell us.
Science matters because it's the surest path to truth. That if you study things scientifically, you look at them critically from lots of different directions, you try to do experiments to tease apart what theories are right and what theories are wrong, what principles are right, what principles are wrong.
Yes.
So, and so much of, to stick with education research, so much of that is built on somebody having a snazzy product and they want to sell it.
Yes.
So we have, for example, learning styles. There's a big paper put out some years ago by one of my colleagues and Hal Pasher and several other people. And they, said there's just, maybe there's some truth to them, but there's no evidence for it yet.
That's true.
And when you look at all the different systems, they don't even agree on what the learning styles are. Some of them have a lot of learning styles, some have a small collection. Anyway, so and yet the U.S. educational system spends millions and millions of dollars on trying to determine what students' learning styles are.
Exactly. And the funny thing is that learning styles are still quite prevalent today. I think it's probably one of the most popular neuromyths that teachers and educators all over the world are still basing their lessons on, right? So they're preparing their lessons based on learning styles. It's a diehard one, I think. This one will not go away too soon, right? And I was wondering, Roddy, why did you start a career in science? Was there anyone who influenced you, or was it something that you liked as a child at school? Did you like biology or something like that? Yeah.
Yeah, it was, I had between my junior and senior years in high school, I was permitted to go to a university in Florida, Stetson University, and you took 3 courses there, and you had to take math and English, and you had one elective. And I chose psychology, and was so glad I did. I fell in love with it from that point on. And so when I went on to college, I decided to major in psychology, and then went on to graduate school. So I've never regretted it at all. I'm retiring this June 30th after 52 years in academia.
Wow. Yeah.
So
A well-deserved retirement, I might say. It's funny because I was just reflecting on your publications, and when I was studying at the University of Bristol, I actually read so many papers that you published with Jeffrey Karpicki, and your book, of course, Make It Stick, which is a best-selling book, and I think a lot of teachers learned so much from it. So that's why I'm excited to have you here, and I want to ask you a big question now related to learning, because I think, as a psychologist, as somebody who works more specifically with cognitive psychology, how would you define learning, Roddy?
Well, there are unfortunately many definitions. The classic one in laboratory studies is you give people, say, something to learn, let's say a list of words, something boring. That's
Yeah.
what psychologists like.
Yeah.
And then you test them, and then you give it to them again, test them again. And so learning there's a nice learning function that's roughly logarithmic. And so uh, you learn quickly at first, and then it tapers off, uh, even if you're not near the top of the scale. So that's the classical definition of learning. But of course, that doesn't satisfy people in education
Yeah.
or other things. And so learning has so many different implementations. I mean, there's just learning all kinds of things, skills, sports, that's all learning. And as well as we typically think of learning in educational context, but if you're going to be an auto mechanic or uh, air conditioning technician,
Yeah.
well, you got a lot of learning to do there too. So learning covers a whole lot of bases.
That is true. And I think there's a difference between what neuroscientists think about learning and what
Yeah,
psychologists think about learning.
yeah,
So all learning requires some kind of physiological process in the brain. Would that be
yeah,
correct? Yeah.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so there's something that transforms in the brain. So we can think of synapses being built or something like that, but
Yeah.
we can also see reflections of that in people's behavior. So if we're looking
Right,
at from a more behaviorist perspective, right? Yeah,
right.
and that's what
I
you do, right, Roddy? I mean, you
I work at
check.
a more behavioral level. Yeah, I
Yeah,
haven't done any neuroscience research to speak of. I'm tacked on to a couple of papers because I help
yeah,
discuss the issues. But no, I'm not a cognitive neuroscientist at all. I'm a
yeah.
straightforward cognitive psychologist.
Great.
Maybe
And I think
dying read.
yeah, and can you tell us a little bit about the kind of work cognitive psychologists do to, like how do you design an experiment? What do you look at? How do you know if somebody has learned something? You mentioned sometimes, boring experiments are the best. You look at a list of words and then you test
Yeah,
them again and see if they still remember
yeah,
the words. That's the classic way of testing people, right? To see if they've learned.
yeah.
Can you give other
That's,
examples?
oh, sure. That the multi. So what I described a moment ago is kind of a multi-trial procedure.
Yeah.
And that's what people studied a whole lot in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And now, many, in fact, I'd say most experiments, especially ones done in kind of neuroscience, are
Yeah.
uh, single trial experiments. You might study 100 pictures and then be tested on 200 and asked to recognize the ones you studied and reject the ones you didn't study. So that's another typical procedure, just a single trial, and that's recognition, what I just described. But you can do it in recall, but it's
Yeah.
harder to do recall in the scanner because when you talk, there's a lot of head movement, and that's bad for scanning.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's
And
possible, but it's not
yeah,
easy.
yeah. And if I remember correctly, many of the papers you published had to do with the testing effect and retrieving, because those
Yeah,
are well established in the literature, and those are
yeah,
principles that have been, studied by many people, replicated in different experiments. So,
yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about the testing effect? Why is that important, and how can that help us
Sure.
learn better?
Yeah. Well, let me back up a little bit. The common way we're told to learn in many educational settings is you read, say, a textbook and you highlight or underline, make notes in the margin, something like that. And then when it's time to study, you go back and review your highlightings and underlinings and so forth. So rereading is basically.
Rereading, yeah, exactly.
Uh, um, but what we found is if instead of rereading, if you test yourself, so you give your, suppose you, when you're studying, you write down questions and allow you to go back and try to answer those questions
Yeah,
and give yourself feedback if you don't know the answer. Of course, that's a much more effective way for remembering in the long term.
yeah,
Uh, think of what you need to do. So we're very concentrated on getting information into memory. I remember
True.
teachers telling me building a storehouse of knowledge. But you
Yeah.
also need to, what you really need to do also, that's important, but is to practice retrieving the information.
So
That's what you're going to
getting
have
out
to
of
do.
memory. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Exactly.
what you're going to have to do eventually.
Yeah.
Um, if you want to use the information. So practicing retrieval helps you store it again and makes retrieval much more likely in the future.
Yeah.
So that's basically, and usually the control condition is rereading. And in some experiments, like the one you mentioned with me and Jeff Trapicki in the 2006, uh, we didn't give feedback for the tested people. They recalled as much as they could of the passage. They got about 70%, but the
Okay.
people who read got 100%. And if you wait a while and test them, the people who were tested, even without feedback, did better later than the people who reread 100% of the material.
Look at that.
Now,
Yeah.
that doesn't always happen. Depends on how much you can recall of the information in the first place. If the test is really hard and you don't get much, well, then you need feedback to get the effect. But
Yeah.
sometimes you can get it without feedback.
Yeah, and I think that has a lot to do with the first chapter of your book, Make It Stick, because there are some strategies we've been using that are not effective, but we don't
Yeah,
think about that. I mean, we think they are effective. We've been
yep,
using them. Like rereading is a classic, and highlighting and looking at your notes, and basically what you're saying is that those things don't work as well as people think. It's actually
right.
better to retrieve and space things out instead of
Yeah,
cramming. Actually, spacing
yeah.
works better, right?
Making them out space retrieval is really good.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And there were a couple of things that I really learned from your book that I started using in my practice as a teacher, as an educator, that
mhm.
I'd like you to talk about. And I think the first one is that learning can be learned. I mean, we can learn better learning strategies if we understand how the brain, the mind learn.
Yeah.
And it's something that we can train. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. You can
Yeah,
get better at remembering. That's what our book is about, essentially. And there's some
exactly.
people, we just mentioned it briefly in the book, who've taken this to an extreme. They've learned classic memory techniques called mnemonic devices that have been around for 2,000 years, but they'll let you do just amazing things. Not me personally, but the
Yeah.
people who do this. They sometimes call themselves memory athletes or
Memory
memory.
athletes, yeah. I've seen a couple, yeah. I mean, they can do
So,
amazing. They can remember a whole deck of cards, like shuffled cards in like under 2 minutes or something. It's really impressive what they can do, right? Yeah.
I think the world record now is about 11 seconds.
Oh,
And
wow.
that means you have to
Yeah.
look at the cards one at a time
Yeah.
and then recall them. I mean, the looking at, I'm sorry, it's how long you look at them that matters. So
Yeah.
you look at them for 11 seconds and then you've got like 5 minutes to recall them.
Wow.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
And
so
that
it's,
has a
it's
lot to
amazing.
do. It's amazing. I mean, and I think the thing is that people want to learn those techniques, but that's not going to be necessarily good for long-term learning, right? Because of the
It
spacing
could
effect,
be.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it could be if they want to remember the information, if they just practice retrieval, they've got this big memory palace. If they
Yeah.
just practice it every day, they remember it as long as they want to.
Exact. So you got to practice every
But
day.
usually
It's
they
more about
don't. They just want
frequency.
to, they're
Yeah.
doing it for a competition and they're remembering cards or words or numbers or something. And so they don't, nothing they want to remember permanently.
Exactly. And it's also from your book that I got the idea of illusion of fluency or competency, So you
Right?
think you're learning well. I think especially when you look at your notes and then your brain goes like, okay,
Yeah,
I've done this work, so I
yeah,
probably know it. And then when you
yeah,
take a test and you don't do very well, you go like, okay, what happened? So this is
yeah,
this is an illusion, right, Roddy?
yeah. That's often what happens. You read things over and over, and you look at it again, and you think, "Oh my God, I read this,
Yeah.
5 times. I know this stuff." But until you test yourself, you don't know if you can pull it out of memory when you need it. And just looking at it, you think, well, this is really fluid. I've really got it here, but you might not. Uh, so that's why the retrieval practice, the testing part, is important.
Exactly. And I think it was chapter 3, maybe, to learn retrieve. I think that was the title or something like
Yeah,
that. So retrieving
yeah,
is really something that uh, I think teachers are not using as much as they could. They're
no,
not allowing students some minutes or maybe 1 minute to actually retrieve or do um, some recall without any prompts or anything, just pulling back from their memory. And this is something that we could do to help our students, right? I mean, we could give them,
right,
after giving input, maybe we can give them some time to retrieve that information and then tell someone or write it down or do something instead of going back to the source material.
right.
Yeah.
Some people give a quiz at the end of every class on the
Yeah.
day's readings and on the material covered in class. Just, like a little 10-minute quiz that
Yeah.
doesn't count for much, but it serves as a learning check both for the students and for the teacher. How much did they get out of this? Do I need to go back and review something if
Yeah.
a lot of people missed it? So it
Excellent.
serves both functions. It helps the student, but also helps the teacher.
Definitely. And I think this goes back to the idea that nowadays, especially in the USA, here in Brazil as well, there are many high stakes tests, taking place everywhere. And I
Hmm.
think we should be doing the opposite. We should be applying more low stakes quizzes,
Yeah,
like to help rehearse and practice that and then apply
yeah,
a high stakes test. Does that make any sense?
yeah. No, it does.
Yeah.
And um, there's often, I think, like in Japan and China, I don't know
Yeah.
about Brazil, but there's like a huge high stakes test that kind of determines the rest of your life, what type
Yeah.
of university you go to. And in the United States, we have the SAT,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
it's become not required at all universities, although ones that dropped it seem to be going back to it.
Yeah.
So the SAT is another high stakes type test. But
Yeah.
one thing they've done here, I think it was mandated by law. Now they're required. They used to keep the test private, uh, so you never
Yeah.
got to see feedback. You never got to see tests. But now what they do is they put all the old tests online. So one of the best ways to practice for the
Yeah.
SAT is simply to take a lot of old tests and then look
Exactly.
things up you missed.
Yeah. So rehearsing and practicing a lot
Yeah,
before taking the test is better than
yeah,
taking many tests in a row, I think, right?
yeah.
Especially because once you get your grades and they're low, they're probably going to be discouraged if you're going to think, well, I'm not learning as much. And
Yeah.
if you're doing low stakes tests, then
Yeah.
it's just practice testing, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. And also, tell us a little bit more about your books and paper. I mean, Make It Stick is probably the most popular book you've published with, if I'm not wrong, Peter Brown and Mark McDaniels, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that your
Um,
your best-selling book, Roddy?
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
it sold 1.7 million copies and
Wow.
been
Amazing.
translated to 18 languages.
Yeah, even to Portuguese, to my language as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have the original though. It's I prefer to read the original. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And the papers you've published, I think many of the I remember reading one about metacognition that was quite cited as well, but most of them were really about retrieving, spacing, and the testing effect and all of that.
Yeah.
Am
From
I
about
correct? Yeah,
2005 to 2018, that's pretty much what I did. Yeah.
yeah. And what was the most exciting finding you came across? After all those years publishing papers and of course the book and everything.
Yeah. Well, the book has had a huge impact,
Yeah,
um, and kind of unexpected to me. My wife asked me how many copies it might sell when it
yeah,
came out. And it was Harvard University Press, not a big trade publisher, although they have a trade input. So I
yeah.
said maybe 30,000. That sounded like a big number. But
Yeah.
then now it's sold 1.7 million.
Wow. Yeah,
So,
that's really impressive. Well deserved because I think it's been helping a lot of teachers and even students around the world, you know. So
yeah,
it was, I think, the first big book that addressed this issue of how we think we learn versus how we actually learn
yeah,
according to the evidence, right? Yeah,
yeah, I think so.
definitely. And
I mean, now there are a lot of books like that, but yeah,
yeah, yeah. That there are a lot of books about retrieving practice, and other evidence-based or evidence-informed practices.
yes,
But I think yours was really the pioneer in a way, you know. So well done, and thank you so much for that. And it was also in your book that you talked about Robert Bjork's research, you know, desirable difficulties, and I think it was
yeah,
maybe chapter 4 or 5, embrace the difficulties, and there's
yeah,
this narrative nowadays that we have to make learning easy, right? Students have to, if they cannot learn easily, it's wrong. We have to change instruction and things like that.
yeah.
But actually, what the evidence shows is that if you make learning a little bit more difficult, it's going to stick, right? Is that right?
Yes. Often, I mean, not every difficulty is going to be desirable.
Yeah,
I make you, you know, read your book upside down or something that probably won't help you. Uh,
definitely. Yeah,
might,
yeah,
but you have to do the experiments to see. So desirable difficulties is refers to a pattern of results that what you do immediately that seems to really help learning, like rereading, that helps you immediately. Uh, but in the long haul, it doesn't help you as much as retrieval practice.
yeah,
And retrieval practice immediately doesn't help compared to rereading. But if you wait a couple of days, in most experiments, retrieval practice benefits more than rereading. So,
yeah. Yeah. And so basically, we should focus on things that will make the conditions a little harder on the students, you know, because that will make them, I don't know, maybe employ an effort that will help them really
yeah,
build those synapses, right? Really consolidate
yeah,
those memories instead of, you know, just focusing on their sense of familiarity. Okay, like I did this
right,
before, I probably know, but you know, if you test yourself, and that's a desirable difficulty, right?
right.
Then you will be
Okay.
sure whether you know
Yeah,
it or not, right?
right. Especially if you do that repeatedly, space intervals, as you mentioned.
Exactly. So I was wondering a little bit about metacognition and knowing which strategies might work best, because I think they
Hmm.
go hand in hand. So if I want to be more metacognitive, more, you know, develop more agency, let's say, about my own learning process,
Yeah,
I should probably know what works best. Otherwise, I'm just doing things that might not be
right,
relevant to learning at all. So would
right.
you say that metacognition is really closely related to learning how to learn best?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. You've got to be aware,
yeah,
metacognitively aware of what works and when to use certain strategies. Um, not every strategy is going to be right for every situation. And so sometimes, perhaps, um, I encourage students, say, when you're reading a textbook,
yeah,
after you finish a section in the book, just close it for a moment and think about it, give it a few moments, and then try to remember what was important in that section. And
yeah,
if you can't do it immediately after you read it, that is giving you retrieval practice if you can.
yeah,
But if you can't do even that, then you don't have a chance later on. And so you need to go back and reread it.
yeah.
So that's just one simple technique that anybody can use while they're reading.
And we can teach students how to do that, right, Roddy? I mean,
Yeah,
a lot of students are just replicating what they've been told by their teachers,
yeah,
and those are inefficient sometimes. They don't really work as well as they should. So we can teach students how to become more
yeah.
metacognitive and more aware of things that work well, right?
Yes. one reason students, I believe, use inefficient strategies is that if you're taking an immediate test, those inefficient strategies can get you through, especially if it's a multiple choice test. Familiarity will work.
Yeah.
This answer looks familiar, the others don't. And so inefficient strategies can get you through,
Yeah.
but if you really want to learn for the long term, and we hope students do, then they need to do something better.
And are there any tips you can share with us about how we can help our students become more metacognitive? Do you have, I don't know, when you were working with your students, did you have maybe a special class that you talked about those things, or was it something more frequent that you told them every lesson, hey, you have to do this or that? Or is there
Yeah.
anything else that can help them?
Yeah, I've been lucky the last 7 or so years of my career. I've taught a small freshman seminar,
Oh,
25 students,
yeah,
and it was called Introduction to Memory Studies, and half of it was on individual memory, like we've been talking about,
yeah.
and I taught with an anthropologist. The other half was on collective memory, uh, which is how we remember in groups. So totally kind of different subfield, but he's a specialist in that and has gotten me interested in it too. So I did the individual memory part, and we went over all these techniques. They read Make It Stick. They also read a book called Moonwalking with Einstein, which I think is an excellent
Oh,
book.
yeah. Joshua Foer, right? I think
Yeah,
that's a great book. Yeah, I've read it.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. He's the one who I think he trained himself to become a memory athlete for the
he did.
research he was doing. Yeah, he was a journalist, I think. Yeah,
Yeah, he was.
yeah,
And he won the U.S. Memory Championship when it was first starting.
yeah,
So he wouldn't have the chance now with the scores he had,
yeah.
but when he was first starting, he won. So that was really
Wow.
cool.
So it is really possible for anyone, I guess, to become a memory athlete. Yeah,
They say that,
yeah,
but I don't believe it. You've got to have a very high working memory capacity,
yeah,
and you've got to be able to block out distractions. You can't let your mind wander for a second.
yeah.
So, um,
So you have to have some kind of aptitude.
yeah,
Yeah,
well,
especially
yeah,
regarding working memory capacity.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they all have high IQs. I mean,
yeah,
there's nobody that comes in with a 90 IQ and becomes a memory athlete.
yeah.
I mean, uh,
Definitely.
and you can't really do it after about age 40. Uh,
Okay. Yeah.
Kind of like athletics,
Yeah.
fall
Well,
off the cliff.
definitely. There are some, so I think there are some prerequisites then, and
Yeah,
that makes me wonder. Some people say that everybody can learn whatever they want, but of course there are certain physiological and cognitive limitations when you
yeah,
think about certain aspects of learning, certain
yeah,
topics that students might learn. But
yeah.
I think it's fair to say that if you teach them these strategies based on evidence, they will have a better shot at learning, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So,
It
so
works like retrieval practice works for all different grade levels, all different kinds of material.
yeah,
There's a debate about whether it works for nonsense materials. I suspect it does. But
yeah.
anyway, nonsense materials aren't too relevant for education.
And even with skills, Roddy, like physical activities. I remember, I think I watched an interview with Robert Bjork talking about tennis players or people who were doing an experiment and they were practicing, forehand, backhand, and then they started
Yeah,
interleaving and there were interesting results. So even when we think about physical skills,
yeah.
can we use retrieval practice?
Well, yeah, that's interesting because in physical skills, doing it is retrieval practice, and certainly uh, athletes do things over and over. The trick there is what's really important is not just doing it in a blocked fashion. Like
Yeah,
if you're a baseball player, back when I played baseball,
yeah,
um, they'd throw you 10 fastballs and 10 curveballs and 10 sliders or whatever.
yeah,
But then when you get in the game, you never know what's coming next. So
Exactly.
it's much better to have your practice match the conditions that you'll be playing the game in.
So interleaving makes sense there because you don't
Yeah,
know what's coming, right? Yeah.
right. Absolutely.
Exactly. I think the big question here is a lot of teachers think it might be difficult to implement those strategies because they have to cover the syllabus of the course, right? So how do you
Yeah,
add spacing, for example? How do you add interleaving? Can you give
yeah,
us tips? Like, are there good ways to actually use those strategies?
yeah. I think so. That in certain things like, well, mathematics, for example, there's usually problem sets that are all blocked. You learn to
Yeah,
solve, say, a polygon.
yeah,
And what's the area of a polygon or something? And you do that 10 times. But then on the test, and it comes up, well, you don't know what you've forgotten the formula.
yeah,
You did 10 times in a row. So it's much better maybe do a little block practice just so they get the hang of it, but then start interleaving and give them problems of all different types. So they have to be used to that because that's what will happen on the test.
yeah. And is it fair? Does it make sense for me to say that we should go, we should add some spacing practice, let's say, in our lessons? Like, okay, so let's go back to what we did at the beginning of this month when we were working with
Yeah,
unit whatever. What can you guys remember? I'll give you a
yeah,
minute. Does that make sense to
yeah.
actually add
That
something
would be
like that?
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that would be great to add that and then give them a refresher if they can't get it, and then maybe
Aha.
test them with that refresher. So, yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's a great idea. I mean, it does
Great.
take time, but you can give it as homework problems too.
Yeah. So one of the fears I get from educators, from teachers, is that this, the science of learning or cognitive psychology or I don't know, educational neuroscience, those fields are going to dictate what teachers do in the classroom because there's like a formula for teaching and learning. But
Yeah,
based on our conversation here, there's so many different ways you can implement those
yeah,
strategies that you cannot really narrow teaching down to a formula like five
no,
steps for a successful
no.
lesson or something like that, right?
Yeah, I think you can think of this as giving teachers a bag of tricks to
Yeah,
use, all of which have some evidence for them, and then it's up to them to adapt them for their class. And so they, might, if it's mathematics curriculum, her leaving is important.
yeah,
Um, and if it's history or something, probably retrieval practice would be more important. So,
yeah. So it's not, I think it's more like cognitive psychology and neuroscience can help empower teachers with evidence.
yeah,
And again, there are, of course, different levels of organization because, cognitive neuroscience will look at neuroimaging studies, for example, and based on our knowledge of, neuroanatomy and things like that, we can make conclusions. We can get to conclusions about how something should work, should not work. And then we look at cognitive psychology, and that's a different level of organization. And teaching
yeah,
is a whole different level of organization because there's so many variables and you have other students in the classroom. So it's really,
yeah,
learning from evidence so that you can make empowered decisions about your own teaching and then look for the evidence that your students will give you whether you're learning or not, right?
yep, absolutely.
Yeah, great. And are you involved? So you said you're going to retire. I'm very glad, well deserved, break from everything. But are you involved in any project with the university now, Roddy, or
Yeah,
are you writing anything?
yeah, no, I'll keep writing and I'm involved in one project on collective memory for which we still have a grant,
Yeah.
and another project, uh, the mainly out of Rice University, not my university, but I'm a what's called a co-principal investigator on the grant. So
Okay.
we have a 5-year, $90 million grant to
Wow. Yeah.
build, I won't go into all the details, but to build different learning platforms so they can talk to each other, so we can ask questions about data that would provide a huge amount of data for us to provide answers. And ideally, they would also be used for true experiments. You could
Okay.
test, 100,000 students or something on these learning platforms. Now, the sad part of the story is we are 1 year into the grant,
Yeah.
and just as we about got to 1 year, President Trump or his people
Yeah.
canceled the.
Oh no. That's awful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have 1 more year, and after that, it's uncertain.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
but so now we're going to do as much as we can the second year.
Yeah.
Still not totally clear we're getting the money for the second year, but we think we are. So anyway, that's unfortunate for all of science
Yeah.
and
Yeah, that
uh,
that's the thing. When I asked you about the importance of science, and I think this is happening all over the world. There are, some governments are not really funding
mhm,
scientific experiments and advancing and help advance science. And I think
yeah,
that's very concerning. I think especially nowadays, we have so much data and research
mhm,
on the impact of, social media and other online digital platforms. And I think there are many interesting ways you can actually collect more data using digital
yeah,
platforms to see how people learn best, what they're accessing. So we
yeah,
have such an amazing opportunity before us, but then governments are not willing to sponsor that, right? That's a shame. I think it's a
yeah,
pity. Yeah, yeah, too bad. But I really hope you can get everything done in this second year. I know it's going to be a lot of work, but
yeah,
I'm looking forward to whatever comes out of this. And
yeah. Well, thank you.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And do you think, Roddy, and we're moving towards the end of this podcast episode, but I wanted to ask you and pick your brain about what about learning on social media and platforms, since you're working with that. A lot of people say that this is actually bad for learning. It's not really helping learning as much as we think, because usually when students are using their computers or phones or something like that, they're multitasking, right? They're, instead
Yeah,
of focusing on what they should be doing, they're like accessing their
yeah.
social media. Do you have any insights to share about that? Should we
Well,
ban phones, or should we help students learn how to use them? So what is the trick
in
here?
the
Yeah,
U.S., a lot of schools are banning phones during
yeah,
the day. St. Louis public school system where I live just banned the phones for
yeah,
class times during next year, hoping that will help people focus. And so I personally think it's a good idea. I don't think people are learning. I mean, I think they're learning from things like Khan Academy on the internet, of course,
yeah.
but on Facebook and all the other apps, they don't. There doesn't seem to be. I mean, there's learning going on, but I'm not sure it's learning great
It's the
stuff.
type of learning we want, right? Probably not.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
no,
yeah. And do you share the same thoughts about artificial intelligence, especially generative artificial intelligence like ChatGPT, for example? Nowadays, students can get an essay, written by ChatGPT basically
yeah,
without any effort. They just, add the prompt and give some
yeah,
pointers. And so that goes against the whole desirable difficulties
yeah.
concept,
No,
right?
it's
Because
terrible.
it's terrible.
But
Yeah.
we. So the last time I taught a class, um, we would ask students to read the material. We give them a probe question.
Yeah.
Uh, and by 8 o'clock in the morning, they had to turn in a 500 or so word essay. And
Yeah.
then my colleague and I would read them by 1 o'clock when the class happened. And one day I read this essay that just made no sense.
Yeah.
And so I talked to my teaching assistant about it, and she said, "Oh, well, let's check it. There's a product I didn't know about
Yeah.
called Turn It In, which is
Yeah.
on Canvas.
It checks
And
for plagiarism and things like that, right? Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
and it's not perfect. They say you can't just rely on this.
Yeah.
But so when we checked this student out, not only was the most recent essay 100% AI generated and
Yeah.
confabulated some stuff, which he couldn't catch because he didn't know what he was supposed to have read.
Yeah.
And but he'd done it for almost the entire semester, so
Oh, wow.
he
Yeah.
was dismissed from the class.
So
So it is
not
possible.
learning anything. Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
possible to catch people. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, nowadays
So
I think there are more reliable platforms to check, but still it's, sometimes it's not 100%, right? And
yeah,
but what we can tell is that students are really delegating those cognitive processes, right, that they need to learn to machines, right? So machines are doing all the work for them. So that means they're not learning, right?
yeah, if they do it that way, but we permitted people to use ChatGPT. We just said use it like any other reference. If you're going to quote something from it, put it in quotes and tell us where you got it from.
Yeah.
And so, fine, go type something into ChatGPT and read it, because usually it's pretty good. Sometimes it hallucinates, as they call
Yeah.
it, but often it provides good information.
Yeah.
And so, I think it can be a useful tool. It's just, it also can be a cheating tool, and you just
Yeah.
have to be careful on that. I'm glad
That's
the
true.
Turing thing, I don't know how it works, but
Yeah.
it was very accurate in the one case I know.
Yeah. I think it can work really well if it gives you feedback on the stuff that you write yourself, I think. Because, the one of the biggest problems in education is
Mhm.
that when students do something, they don't get immediate feedback because there are too many students, one
Yeah,
teacher. And I think those tools they can help with that immediate
yeah,
feedback because we were talking about retrieving and if you try something out and then you get immediate feedback, that's very
yeah,
valuable, right? For learning.
yeah.
So would you
It
say
is.
that makes sense? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's in some studies, delaying the feedback a little bit helps even more than immediate feedback, but
Yeah.
that is a controversy that's ongoing now.
Oh, interesting.
When does immediate feedback help the most, and when does slightly delayed feedback, like a minute, help the most?
Ah, okay, great. Yeah. And so moving toward the end now, Roddy, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about, well, because, this is part of the podcast. I really want people to be inspired by, scientists and people working in academia and teachers. I was just wondering, were you a nerd, growing up? Did you like reading about science
Yeah,
or maybe a geek, even like, science fiction, fantasy novels and things like that?
yeah. I read science fiction from middle school to high school, grad school. I still read it occasionally, like The Martian by Andy Weir and that
Yeah.
newer book he had. I like that. But back when I was growing up, it was Isaac Asimov and
Yeah.
Robert Heinlein. Stranger in a Strange Land was a book I liked a lot.
Wow.
Uh,
Yeah.
and
Great.
the Foundation series by Asimov, I thought
Yeah.
was terrific. I've read that twice over the years.
Definitely.
Uh,
Yeah. The Empyrean.
and
Yes. I remember that
and
one. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and Dune was another favorite, Frank Herbert. So and Contact by Carl Sagan.
Carl Sagan. Yeah. That's amazing. One of
That
my
was a great
favorite. Yeah.
book, and the movie
Yeah.
was terrific too. And
Yeah.
then what else? The Dune movie is great too. Most recent one.
Yeah.
I kind of like the earlier ones too, just because I like the book.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I read science fiction. I've never liked fantasy much. People
Okay.
flying around with broomsticks, and I
Yeah.
like science fiction that sticks with what we know about nature, and not
Yeah.
uh, the fantastic elements.
Great. So
So
you had this innate curiosity within that maybe had something to do with, choosing science as a career. I think.
maybe so,
Yeah.
yeah. But Yeah, it was
Yeah,
uh, very impactful on me, science fiction was.
yeah,
And I don't know exactly why I got out of the habit of reading it regularly, but there's so many other things to read. I'm interested in history, and of course, I work in psychology, so you wind up reading a lot of that.
yeah.
So, uh,
And one thing I always wonder is that there, even with Asimov and so many other authors, there's always an element of how we are going to learn things in the future.
mhm.
And then some people think like the Matrix, for example, that you can plug a person's brain into whatever
Yeah,
computer, and then you can learn instantly whatever. There
yeah,
are some technologies coming out nowadays that do that in a way, but it's not as we see in the movies, right? So, is
yeah.
there anything that caught your attention? Something that usually sci-fi gets wrong about learning? Can we learn immediately like that ever? Is that something that could be possible?
Well, all of the brain implants now are usually used for mediation of people who've, become blind or deaf or what
Yeah,
have you, cochlear implants, and so. Yeah, who knows? In 100 years, we might have that kind of thing, but
yeah,
it's not in my lifetime, and possibly not in yours either.
yeah. Probably
So,
not. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Science
uh,
is making a lot of progress, but yeah, I think. I mean, to me, it's. I keep thinking, have billions of neurons and synapses, and we have networks spread all over the cortex, right? To map those things, it's just, what a monumental task that would be, right? To find the precise, the specific networks that we need to activate, let's say, for something to be learned. And yeah, but who knows? I mean, there are some things are now a reality that people couldn't even fathom, at the
oh,
turn of last century, right? So yeah, we don't know. Yeah,
well, when I think about my days in graduate school, uh, I mean, the idea of having brain imaging would sound like total science fiction.
yeah,
And
definitely.
then, what was it? Only 16 years after I graduated, the first brain imaging of cognitive function was published.
Wow. Yeah,
1988, 89. That's when it really started up.
yeah,
So, things happen at a very rapid rate all of a sudden.
yeah.
iPhones come in, and that changes the world in so many ways.
That is so
And
true. Yeah,
and now AI is going to do the same thing, although I don't think we quite know how yet.
yeah. Perfect. And now
Early
we
days.
can, yeah, we can even. There's this amazing image. It's a neuroimaging study, the connectome, right? That shows the
Yeah.
neurons and which directions, so this is really amazing. And so, Roddy, I will ask you the last question now. It's time for us to wrap up. I could talk to you, the whole day. You have so many interesting things to share. But do you have any final tips or a final message for students and teachers out there about cognitive psychology, evidence-based strategies, anything that you can tell our listeners here?
Buy, make it stick.
Well, yes,
Read,
that
make
would,
it stick.
yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
Read and reread
no,
after retrieving. First, you
yeah,
stop retrieve and then you reread, right? To check if
yeah,
you got it right. Yeah.
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 But no, more seriously, I think we've covered an awful lot of ground, and I don't know that I have anything else to add.
Yeah.
Um, there's a lot to add, but nothing, you know,
Great.
comes to mind right now.
Yeah, no, I think you did cover a lot of ground, and well, thank you so much again for accepting this invitation.
Mhm.
As I said at the beginning, it's really a privilege to me, especially because I'm talking to someone I read a lot of your work, really, as a master student, later as a teacher trainer, helping teachers in
Mhm.
Brazil around the world. So, if anything. I really think people should buy your book. I think
No, well,
you've
thank
written,
you.
yeah, everything is really well written there. Go to Make It Stick, and I'm sure you're going to benefit a lot from reading the book and using the strategies that are described there, right? Thank you so
Yeah,
much, Roddy. It was a
yeah, thank
pleasure.
you. Yeah, good talking to you.
Thank you.